What if one explosive statement about Canada's future could set off a whirlwind of trade wars, energy shakeups, and shifting alliances on a global scale? That's exactly what happened when the US hinted that Canada could become the 51st state, triggering nationwide outrage up north and sparking a domino effect no one saw coming. But this isn't just about words. It's about who holds the real power in North America and beyond, and how a seemingly offhand comment can flip entire industries on their heads. Strap in, because what's happening now might change the balance of global economics for years to come. Before the 51st state remarks shattered diplomacy, one decision in early 2025 set the stage for a massive upheaval. The Trump administration slapped a 20% tariff on Chinese goods, hoping to regain leverage and protect certain industries at home. Instead, China hit back even harder, rolling out its own wave of tariffs against the US, while tightening fresh trade deals with Canada, the European Union, and other eager partners. Suddenly, a giant market that American farmers and manufacturers had relied on for billions of dollars seemed to vanish overnight. Soybeans were left piling up in silos, and tech firms had to scramble for new buyers. Meanwhile, Canada and the EU stepped in to grab the opportunities left behind, sealing new partnerships and cementing their place as more reliable suppliers. American producers, especially in agriculture and industrial machinery, started feeling the squeeze almost immediately. This tariff battle opened the door for something nobody anticipated: a brand new energy alliance between Canada and China. For decades, the US had been one of China's top suppliers of crude oil and natural gas. But after Washington hiked tariffs on Canadian oil imports, Ottawa was forced to look elsewhere. Enter Beijing. With the Trans Mountain Expansion, TMX, ramping up from a capacity of 300,000 barrels a day to nearly triple that, Canada found a direct, cost-effective route to ship oil to Asia. The LNG Canada project followed suit, offering up to 26 million tons of liquefied natural gas per year. Once hungry for US shipments, China began sealing deals with Canada to lock in a long-term supply of oil and gas, dramatically reducing its reliance on American energy. This wasn't just a small shift, it was a dramatic realignment that left the US struggling to find ways to maintain influence. As China locked down Canadian resources, the question became, would US leaders double down on tariffs or try to play catch-up in a market rapidly moving on without them? While energy alliances were changing overseas, American farmers were confronting a crisis at home. China, once a massive buyer of American soybeans, corn, wheat, and meat, nearly shut off imports from the US. By 2023, their new best friends were nations like Brazil and Argentina for soy and corn, and various European countries for pork and other livestock products. For farmers in the Midwest, it was devastating. Many had expanded production during the golden years of trade with China, only to wake up to collapsing prices. Silo after silo filled with unsold crops, while entire farming communities faced financial ruin. It wasn't just about losing a buyer, it was about losing the biggest buyer in a market that had come to depend on Chinese demand. Surging competition from Brazil and Argentina, along with Argentina's improved trade ties, only made things harder. But that wasn't all. Might sound cliché, but it's the truth here. Just as farmers and businesses were grappling with one disaster, an even bigger political firestorm erupted. Out of nowhere, Donald Trump dropped a jaw-dropping remark about Canada possibly becoming the 51st state. He even suggested splitting Canada into two states, one conservative, one liberal, to fit neatly into American politics. To many Canadians, this was no joke. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and leaders from multiple provinces promptly fired back, calling the idea an affront to Canada's sovereignty and sense of national pride. Suddenly, the tension that had been building for years burst into the open. Social media campaigns across Canada demanded a boycott of American goods. Some provinces literally pulled US-made products, like bourbon, off store shelves as a show of defiance. To observers, it was a culture shock. The historically friendly neighbor to the north was acting more like an adversary, hitting back at Washington's perceived arrogance. The ripple effects were immediate. Canadians canceled vacations to the U.S. in droves, slashing tourism revenue in hotspots like Florida, California, and Texas. Restaurants, hotels, and airlines felt the heat. News outlets in both countries buzzed with debate on whether America's approach had driven a permanent wedge between the two neighbors. The boycotts weren't just symbolic. American businesses started losing out on billions in potential sales, and local economies in border states felt the pinch as cross-border shopping all but dried up. Maple leaf flags appeared in front yards across Canada as a proud sign of standing tall against outside pressure. Even Canadians who usually avoided politics found themselves taking sides, reinforcing the idea that Canada was not just the little brother in this relationship. While Canada and the U.S. locked horns, China was busy forging new alliances with nations under U.S. sanctions, namely Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. It wasn't just about snagging cheap oil and gas, though that was certainly a draw. It was also a strategic move to diversify energy sources and dodge potential future sanctions. In this new global landscape, Beijing's bet was simple. If the U.S. keeps turning inward and alienating allies, China will scoop up the available resources. For Washington, the real blow came when it realized that by pushing Canada away, it effectively handed China an even bigger role in North American energy. The trade war had quickly spiraled into an all-out battle for global influence, a battle the U.S. risked losing if it didn't act fast. Amid these tensions, Canada's next move took the U.S. by surprise. A bold approach to Europe. At a NATO and EU summit, Prime Minister Trudeau made a compelling pitch that Europe should depend less on American suppliers and broaden its trading relationships with Canada. Through the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, Canada held a strong hand in European markets. If even a fraction of Europe's imports shifted from the U.S. to Canada, it would mean billions of dollars in annual losses for American industries. Worse yet, a successful Canadian pivot would illustrate that Washington might not be the undisputed go-to partner for NATO economies. This left U.S. policymakers scrambling to respond. Some argued for sweetening trade incentives, while others insisted on more tariffs or restrictions to keep Canada in check. But either path held risks, and the clock was ticking. Each passing month saw more European interest in Canada's stable resources, advanced manufacturing, and newly rising aerospace capabilities. The tide was turning, slowly but unmistakably. If the initial trade dispute sounded messy, the talk of a 100% tariff on Tesla electric cars by Canada was downright explosive. Tesla wasn't just another U.S. company. It had become a global symbol of American innovation and the push toward clean energy. By proposing such a steep tariff, Canada signaled it was ready to strike directly at an emblem of U.S. tech leadership. The fallout could be enormous. Tesla's vehicles, already on the high end of the market, would see their Canadian prices skyrocket. Sales could nosedive, investments could freeze, and even the broader electric vehicle (EV) sector might suffer, with fewer consumers willing to pay top dollar for sustainable cars. Given Tesla's significant market share, a blow this large could set back North American EV adoption, hamper the ongoing green transition, and leave more space for European, Chinese, or even homegrown Canadian EV manufacturers to step in. All these battles, tariff escalations, boycotts, energy realignments, and automotive feuds, point to one massive looming question. Has the U.S. unintentionally triggered its own decline on the world stage? By driving Canada to look eastward toward China and bridging new ties with Europe, the U.S. might be losing critical ground that will be hard to reclaim. For Canada, it's a defining moment. No longer content to be overshadowed by its southern neighbor, it's forging independent partnerships and leveraging global demand for energy, manufacturing, and even tech. China, meanwhile, continues to expand its trade network, focusing on discounted oil from sanctioned nations and forging strategic deals where the U.S. once dominated. So what happens next? If Washington keeps piling on tariffs and doubling down on hardline rhetoric, it risks permanently pushing away partners and ceding global influence. On the other hand, A sudden shift in strategy, perhaps more diplomatic outreach to repair the relationship, could still turn things around. Nothing is certain, except for one undeniable truth. North American politics and global power balances will never look the same. And if one offhand suggestion about turning Canada into a U.S. state can spark this level of chaos, imagine what else might be just around the corner.